Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of Wild Wednesday webinar. My name is Paul Kiwi, and I'm the Executive Director of MIPA. And MIPA, along with several other regional associations, OPA, TISPA, UMAP, PPA Wisconsin, PPA Chicago, PPA Midwest, and the Arizona Promotional Professionals Association all bring this monthly webinar series to you. Mark your calendars for July. On July 27, we have Ask the Designer, where industry designer and artist T. Hamilton will be taking all of your questions about how to prepare artwork, the stupidest questions you can come up with, the questions you've been dying to ask, maybe anonymously. We'll allow you to do that as well. Still wondering what vector artwork is? She'll answer that. She'll tell you what designers need from you in order to create great artwork, as well as what suppliers are looking for in order to give you the very best. So that's on July 27th. You'll be seeing the advertising for that coming up. Want to remind you that as you end today's webinar and click the end meeting box in the upper corner, you'll be directed to a survey. If you fill out that survey form and include your PIN number, I'll submit your credits to PPAI to get you CAS credits for today's webinar. If you don't know your PIN number, I'll have to direct you presentation. Feel free to type in your questions and I'll be sure to jump in there, interrupt them, try to make them lose his train of thought and have them answer.
Got it out.
And speaking of UMAP, Joe is the former president of UMAP. He is also a former past director of PPAI's board of directors. Joe has a company called Scott & Associates. He's a little bit different than most promotional products distributors. He actually runs an advertising agency and actually knows how to charge for things and get paid for things, which is a pretty incredible concept on its own. Today, Joe's going to talk about how selling is a lot like dating. The rules are really the same. And Joe, since I'm in a noisy hotel, I'm going to mute myself and let you roll with it. So, everyone, Joe Scott.
Hey, Paul, thanks a lot for the introduction. Actually, Paul and I had ponytails together, I think probably about 10 years ago. And also just a little comment for those of you who don't know T. Hamilton. In my opinion, she's probably one of the most gifted graphic designers that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And if there's anybody in your firm who would be interested in learning more about artwork, I would really encourage you to have them attend that webinar because she's a pretty special person and extremely talented. And Paul mentioned a little bit about our company. We started in 1993, and we actually were doing service award programs, and then. And actually, the company I was working for really discouraged us from getting interested in promotional products, which made sense because they didn't want us to lose focus. But as soon as we started our firm, and I started actually paying attention to promotional products, I realized why they didn't want us selling any, because within, I think we were selling about, around $1 million worth of award programs. And 4 years later, we were selling $1.5 million worth of promotional products. So anyway, they obviously didn't want us. Oh, you don't want to mess with that stuff. But it actually messing with that stuff really caused us to have a kind of a nice change in lifestyle. And along the way, we were free to do what our clients needed us to do, which kind of first started with web design and online advertising and all that kind of stuff. So what's happened over the last 20 or so years is we've morphed from a company that sold promotional products and award programs to an advertising agency that sells promotional products and award programs. And one of the things that we find really helpful is we'll come in and we get a chance, actually, we work with small companies. And we get a chance to talk to the senior leadership of these companies and pitch them on the marketing and the advertising part of it. And then the promotional product sales are oh, by the way, do you guys buy any of this kind of stuff? So I won't belabor that point as much as I already have, but it's, and my contact information, you can get that from Paul. If you'd like to discuss maybe some of the details of how we went from point A to point Z, I'd be happy to talk to you. But we're going to talk about selling and dating. And I was mentioning to Paul how this session came about. I was at an industry meeting and I was trying to remember where, I think it might have been in Dallas. And we were just kind of sitting around talking about, for those of us who have actually had sales training, we were lamenting that our sales training was so crappy. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so I started, then somebody said, yeah, making cold calls is a lot like going to a bar and try to pick somebody up. And then that's how this session got launched. So anyway, learning how to sell and date is kind of the same thing. And I did a little research and I found out that, about $16 billion a year is spent on sales training, and dating services have yet to crack the $1 billion mark. And the thing that I thought was really weird is that I think we're better at dating than we are at selling. And how that came about is I don't think I've ever heard someone say that, hey, I closed this deal because of sales training. I don't hear that. But I was just at an event last night and I was talking to a couple and, and I said, well, how did you guys meet? And they said, well, we were on Match.com. So I think there's some basis for this situation. And I think as human beings, I think we're better at dating and relationships than we are about selling. And I think if we draw upon the knowledge that we have and move that over into our selling area, I think we can do pretty well. And so the question is why is this so difficult? And in 1994, and this is our son, Dan, he was, I took him on a sales call. I think he was in third grade, and I think the pipes, I'm in Minnesota, the pipe froze at his school, so he was off. So I took him on a sales call to sell a safety award program at a power plant. And I thought, actually, his sister Allison was there too, and she was 5. So I took him along to the sales call, and I gave a T-shirt to my daughter, and I gave a jacket to my son. And I said, okay, you guys look at all the zippers and the stitching and stuff like that, because I'm going to have you guys make the presentation. So we go there, and the general manager of the plant actually had another conference room set up with coloring books. And I said, no, they're going to make the presentation. So anyway, they go through the presentation. The plant manager goes, this is fantastic. We're going to do the program with you guys. And we shook hands and turned around and left. And as we were driving, our daughter said, I didn't really understand that somebody had just bought something from me. And I said, oh, no. Actually, you guys helped sell the program. And this is where our son said, oh, so Dad, it's not the selling that's difficult. It's finding the ones who want to buy. And I really wish I would have been that smart when I was 8. So I just kind of flipped that over and said, hey, it's not the dating that's difficult. It's finding the ones who want to go out. And that has to do, of course, with the prospecting. So probably the number one dating site that I use, being a married guy, is LinkedIn. And when you think about it, there's really not a lot of difference between what you have on a LinkedIn profile versus Match.com. The only difference is that, in my opinion anyway, I think the stuff on a LinkedIn profile is probably a little bit more accurate than what you'd find on some of the other dating sites. But it's pretty straightforward. I mean, here's a picture of me with guitars growing out of my head and, just some basic information. Of course, it doesn't have height and weight and all that kind of stuff, but nobody cares about that. And I just thought, it's kind of interesting. That's really what LinkedIn is all about, because as you know, and this is something that Paul and I were talking about just before the webinar, is he made a comment and he said, if you're if somebody isn't interested, from a selling standpoint, it's probably because you're not interesting, or your product or your service isn't interesting. And I think the corollary to that in dating is that, if you're not attracting anyone, you're probably not attractive. And being attractive or being interesting has a lot to do with understanding what the other party is looking for and making sure that they know that. And kind of something I find to be really interesting is we have 2 clients. They happen to be other advertising agencies. And when they were looking for someone to do what we do, which is get customers for our clients, one of them, guy's named Steve Penn, he took a look at my profile picture and he sent me an email and he said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to do some work for our agency. Is that an ES 350 in the stand behind you?" So, I mean, the fellow's definitely a guitar nerd, but I think you all know, how finding something in common with somebody is really a nice basis for a relationship. And usually the most important part is the values structure that you have. But there are other things that make you interesting or attractive. So that's why I think the site is very interesting. And I usually I've been on LinkedIn, I think since 2007 or 8. So I get a fair amount of traffic. And as you can see by this little, 10 people in the last 3 days, it's up from there. Now, from a dating standpoint, this I think is pretty significant because it's almost like a blind date, where it's like, here are all these people who are saying, "Hey, this guy is really good at these things. And these are the things that we use to attract people to our company." So it's one thing for you to say wonderful things about yourself on your profile, but then when you have a bunch of other people lining up and putting their name and their face on there, that's just pretty darn cool. And so it's not a LinkedIn class, but a pretty easy way to get people to do this is you just go and recommend them for something that they happen to be good at. I talked a little bit about crappy sales training. I used to work for a large computer company that is no longer in business. And the sales training that they paid millions of dollars for, I called it, snappy answers for stupid questions. And the way I was taught to sell was finding out what the objections were and then countering them. And this was a really classic example. If you're selling something and somebody said, "Hey, it's too expensive," then what the pat answer was, if it wasn't too expensive, then in your opinion, do you feel that you would buy it? It was all this. It was like tricking people, which was just a bunch of, insert your 4-letter word there. So it was, I actually started off incorrectly. And also, I also wasn't married at the time and wasn't dating. So I don't know, maybe those 2 things have something to do with each other. But something really important, I actually ended up being quite successful with that company and got hired away to sell for somebody else. But this is where I learned that selling really wasn't selling. It was you want to expose yourself in a, not that way, but expose who you are to somebody so that they get to know you and trust you and like you and potentially work with you. And I did learn the hard way, and it was all about, finding, being attractive, finding out about them. And the first computer that I sold with the second company, I actually spent a lot of time, examining their business, going through the warehouse and all that kind of stuff. And then I found out in an offhand conversation that it took them 3 weeks to get their invoices out. And back in the day, like the interest rates were like 20%. It was like crazy. And when I figured that out And what I was able to do, I just did the math. And instead of, selling somebody stuff and then taking 3 weeks to bill them and then another 30 days, that was really expensive. It was 70 grand a year. And that was coincidentally happened to be, it was 1/3 of my quota. And that happened to be, what the computer cost. And literally, he had gotten to know me really well, and I'd spent a fair amount of time learning his business. And then when I was able to say, hey, this is what I've learned, this is an opportunity I see for you, and I explained it to him, literally, he pulled out his personal checkbook and he wrote a check for $70,000 for that computer. And that was, we all have these learning experiences. And a lot of times it's the only reason I was able to learn that lesson is that I think this business owner took pity on me or something or other. But I had a number of people who became customers and friends would just kind of critique things and just say, you know what, you're really not that good at selling, so forth. But I thought that was really important because instead of foaming at the mouth and talking about all sorts of crap that you don't even know that somebody's interested in, it's like, well, tell me about you, tell me about your business. So, I mean, that was a revelation to me. And it's now like, I don't even consider myself to be a salesperson anymore because I really don't. I just try to figure out what does somebody need? And then it's my job to find somebody to do it, even if it's not me. So I kind of laid this thing out and put the sales stuff on one side and the dating equivalent on there. And as you can see, I'm not going to read all these because you guys probably have already read this. But it's important to think about how this works. And I'll go through and give some examples of each one. And one of the things too that I think is really important is you talk about losing accounts, getting low margin clients, and then something that we all have to do on occasion is apologize when things don't work properly. So I'll take a spin through this for you guys. That prospecting is cruising. The problem is that, the relationship that you get is probably not going to be very high quality. Of course, lots of rejection. It's very transaction oriented. I think that would be kind of the equivalent of that would be Tinder, and as most of us who have or did that back in the day, it rarely turns into a long-term relationship. So that's the first one. Targeted prospecting, looking for love in all the right places. An example of this is I'm in a suburb. Actually, it's an actual town that happens to be now a suburb of Minneapolis. And I spend a fair amount of time, usually if my brain gets overloaded, I'll just get in the car and just kind of drive around through an industrial park and look to see, if there's lots of cars there. It's like really scientific. But I happened to be driving by this really large building and there was a new logo on the front. And so I thought, oh, there's something going on. Maybe they need some people like us. So what I did is that I'm really a nerd on this. I go and since we only deal with small companies, I get on their websites and I read every single word of every page on their website. And I usually find typos and stuff, and that's another discussion about how I utilize that information to get appointments with senior marketing people. But anyway, I found that Friday was take your dog to work day. And then I thought, that's really cool. And I became very attracted to this prospective customer because I'm saying, I like that. They must have a really cool vibe. And I was pretty excited and I called the marketing department receptionist, who was probably one of the best screeners that I've ever met. And I said, I'm Joe Scott. I'm with Scott and Associates. We get customers for people and we have an agency right here in town. I looked at your website and I saw your lucky dog stuff. I have to work with you guys. You guys, it just seemed like you're really great. How do I get together with your vice president of marketing? And she just started laughing because, as you could probably imagine, she had never ever been approached. And I wasn't trying to go around her or sweet talk her or anything. I just was so excited. I said, I just have to meet with you guys. And she put me right through to this guy. And I talked to him and he said, yeah, when do you want to come out? And I said, how about Friday? And he goes, well, that's when we bring our dogs to work. And at the time we had a miniature schnauzer. So I brought my schnauzer to the sales call. And it went really well. I mean, they're still a client of ours today. The next thing is like stalking people. And I call it research on LinkedIn, but it's actual stalking. But and this is a really good example, is that this fellow, Steve Grady, is just the kind of guy that I'm looking for. There's the company that he works for is perfect size. It's business to business. And, I looked at his picture and I'm going, he looks like he's cool. So I found some, did some information and just sent him an email. And, here's who I am. I was reading your LinkedIn profile. This is, I read your website and I think there's some opportunities. And the opportunity is that they only sell through distributors. And those of us who have promotional products clients that sell through any sort of distribution, it's all about mind share, because the people who sell Steve's products sell other competitive products. And one of the things that we did for him is we figured out how to create different programs and different sales tools to make it easier for his distribution channel to sell his stuff compared to somebody else's. So if you want to ask somebody out on a date, you got to do a little research, and that actually worked out quite well. Kind of to reinforce a couple of points that I made and probably some things that is that when I was first taught how to sell, it was all about, schmoozing and trickery and, what they call it, fast talk and fast walking. And it was like, what's in it for me? I mean, I thought about it as that, man, if I sell a $70,000 computer, I would make $14,000. And in 1977, that was a lot of money. But what I've learned, and as you guys have learned, is that if you think about yourself basically as a servant, what can I do for you? That's so different than the traditional salesperson. And the tough thing that when I first started out, I mean, you got a mortgage, you got all these things. You're thinking about, how am I going to get money to serve my lifestyle? I found out that if I concentrate on how I can help other people, I'm going to be considered a lot differently. And especially when you bring somebody else in who can do what they need that you can't. And so I was thinking about the Eagles song Shoes, where they have the thing, desperation in the singles bars. That's a salesperson who, has to sell something quickly to support their lifestyle. It's also really important, when you qualify somebody, you have to be able to very quickly articulate why you should be attractive, or why you should be interesting, or why they should think you can help them. And this is for those of you who have gone to my "What do you do for a living" class. This is kind of the nexus of how this happened, is that I was at a chamber meeting, and whenever I go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting, I always sit next to people I don't know, and of course, the thing that's going to happen is that at a chamber meeting, people are going to ask what you do for a living. And this guy turned to the person to his left and said, "What do you do for a living?" And this individual said, I sell ad specialties. And this person said, "Please pass the butter." And I just went, oh my gosh. Of course, that was an opportunity for a date, and that person just blew it. But the scary thing for me is if he would have asked me first, I would have said the same thing, because at the time that was mostly what we were doing, was selling ad specialties. So I'm like going, crap, what am I going to say to get this guy interested? And I can't say I sell ad specialties. So what I worked on my pickup line like instantaneously, and he turned to me and he said, "Hey, Joe, what do you do for a living?" And at the time, I just made this up, and I said, "Well, I help my clients attract and retain customers and employees." And he literally, he stopped, and he kind of, those kind of weird little banquet chairs, they don't slide. So he kind of grabbed the bottom of it and kind of hopped up in the air and turned to face me. And there was some profanity. I mean, what he said is, "How do you do that?" But he put some other more colorful language in there. And then I just said, "Well, tell me about your business." I said, "Well, I really don't know how I can help you because I don't really know you. Tell me about your business, so on and so on and so forth. And then I can give you some examples of how we've helped other customers do that." And then so we were instantly on a date. Like our date started right there. And that was because for some reason, I was channeling some genius and came up with this thing. And now what we do is we just tell people we, get customers for people. So having this pickup line, if you will, or what do you do for a living? If you have that at your disposal, it's pretty easy for you to become interesting or attractive, depending upon, how you look at that. So we ended up having a date at his office. And I always like having the first meeting at somebody else's office, just because there's some opportunities for you to, scope out the office, see what's interesting. And then a lot of people like to show you around. And especially if it's a manufacturing plant, I just go crazy watching like cans moving down an assembly line. And the thing that a remark that people have made to me and other people at our firm is they say, "You know what? You guys are more excited about our business than some of my employees are." And that's I think a very telling comment. And that's there's nobody more interesting than someone who's interested in you or your business. So this is stuff that I just kind of learned along the way, and thought it was pretty interesting. Proposal. Well, that's the same in both. It's when you think about, for those of you who are married, and you think about what led up to the proposal and this great relationship, it's getting to know each other, finding out what you can do for somebody else. When it's getting married, it's like, what drives them nuts, and you just try not to do it very much. But it's instead of a document, it's like all these conversations that you've had, getting to know somebody, and then just realizing, this actually makes sense for us to have a long-term relationship. So I thought that was kind of interesting how we utilize it. Actually, the most important part of starting this relationship is that proposal process. And as you can tell, there's probably some times where your proposal, it's just a great way to say, this is what I've learned so far, and this is what I see doing in the future, and this is why we should do it. So I think that's pretty cool. The thing that I've learned about closing is actually not necessarily selling somebody something. And I think I've had a number of these things happen. And as part of getting to know somebody, I was talking to this one guy, and I wasn't being particularly interesting, because he said, "Hey, would you mind if I change the subject?" And I sure, go ahead. And he said, "Hey, my son, he was having a little trouble in school, and he needs a hobby." And I'm thinking, he's expressed interest. He's always like pounding on stuff around the house. And I thought maybe if I get him a drum set, that'll kind of help him out. And I said, I'm a musician. And I said, hey, man, I know just the place. And so what I did is I said, hey, you just set aside some time. Don't care, Monday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever. I'll take you over to my favorite music store and introduce your son to these guys, and then we'll get him a drum set and everything's cool, which I did. And so actually that guy did not become a customer of ours for several years. But the bottom line of the whole thing is that it was my opportunity to serve him or to help him out and bring somebody else in who I trust, somebody in my network. And it was really cool because it was when you can do something for somebody's kid or their spouse or another one of their friends, it's a lot. I think it's a lot more special than actually doing something for somebody personally. So that was like our first exchange, if you will, was that, and that's how we started our relationship. And fortunately, in my situation, I don't really have to sell stuff today or tomorrow or next month, so I have the luxury of building these relationships over time. And there's like one guy, I called on him for 25 years before he was in a situation where he could actually do business with us. But we established a friendship and kind of made a joke out of it. And then he called me, this is like 2 Octobers ago, he called me up and he's just laughing. And he said, hey, I just changed jobs. I'm the vice president of marketing at this company. And I can actually hire you now, which was really cool because I just got to like the guy and kind of forgot about selling him anything. And off we went. So that was kind of a cool deal. And the thing that was really cool is that I called the guy up with getting his drum set for his kid. And the thing that was really cool is the kid really took to it, and it was driving him nuts because the kid was playing his drums all the time. And then he said, oh, by the way, I was paying attention to what you're saying. I need some help. And he also was a golfer. So one of the things that I do to not only vet potential clients, but give them a chance to vet me, is that I like taking people out for golf. And since I'm really not sure like who's reading people's emails, I always say like a 4-hour real estate inspection in the subject line. But the value there is first of all, you get to spend, do we ever get to spend 4 or 5 hours with anybody? It's pretty rare. And, it's like asking somebody out on a get acquainted date. But the reason why I like taking people out golfing is you really can learn a lot about people. I don't care if they're any good. I really don't. Really, I want to know is, if they what happens when they hit a bad shot? Do they know the rules? Do they cheat? How seriously do they take themselves? So that's really a pretty good vetting process and something that I enjoy. And if you don't happen to golf, think about another activity. I mean, I took some guys out shooting sporting clays, and that's pretty similar because when there's firearms involved, somebody who knows what they're doing, you have a high level of confidence that they're pretty organized individuals. And like the repeat business, was it good for you? Let's do it again. And that's in the promotional products business. Many times it's you build your relationship based upon successful transactions. And it's a little bit different than some businesses, but maybe the good news is promotional products as opposed to awards, but promotional products are consumables. And when you execute and do it with good humor and handle the types of things that we all run into from time to time, deliveries or artwork or whatever, you earn the right to do business with them again. And that's the same thing. I helped the guy get a drum set for his kid. The second date, we went out and played golf and decided that we were both, pretty decent people. So that's kind of how you can build this relationship with more personal transactions instead of like trying to sell them something right away, which I don't like when people try to sell me stuff. I want to buy things. I don't want people to sell them to me. In both the advertising business and in the promotional product side of things, we want to get the foot in the door. We want to go out on the date. We want to have a successful transaction of some kind. And one of the things that's kind of a fine line is that although people want to know, if you've done something like this before, or, can I talk to some of your clients and so forth? I learned something from a shoe salesperson at Nordstrom's. The gal was like, you could tell she was insanely busy because she was really, really good. But when it was my turn to talk to her, it was like I was the only person in the place. And so I think although we all like to talk about what we've done for other people, that's kind of an area, at least in the way I do things, where I try to be careful about talking about all these other clients, because it's kind of like talking about all your other girlfriends or boyfriends, So anyway, that's kind of a fine point. You guys can do whatever you feel comfortable with, but this is something that's kind of struck me as an area that I have to be a little bit careful on. Now referral is a blind date, isn't it? And that's, I think that's just kind of fun because you think about the exact same thought process your customers or your friends go through to set you up on a blind date. And I find that, and my wife's like this, guys don't, at least in my opinion, guys don't really refer as much as women do. And guys are probably really not comfortable setting up a friend of theirs on a blind date. And I don't know why this is. I think maybe it's too risky. Maybe gals are better at, knowing people. But when you think about it, there's a lot of risk involved, because it's like, okay, I have a friend of mine who's single. I have another friend of mine who's single. I know them pretty well, and I think they'd probably get along. They'd make a cute couple, if you will. And then you put them together and you just hope that it works. Well, that's the same thing with a referral. And I tell you, beautiful things can happen with referrals. Actually, I'm going to tell you a little story about we do a lot of work with Cargill. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Cargill, they're this really huge multinational company that nobody knows about because they don't do a lot of consumer related stuff. And we were working with them on a bunch of different projects. And then one of my customers over there said, "Hey, I know this gal who has the same position as I do at Archer Daniels Midland, and I told her about you, and she would like to meet." And I was very thankful and very flattered. And so I got on the phone and called, and they're in Decatur, at least the location is in Decatur, Illinois. So this is kind of like a long distance blind date. And I called her up and I, introduced myself, and she goes, "Oh yeah, Marge was just telling me about you." I said, "Well, this is going well." Well, the short story is she said, we're in the process of, we're investigating new vendors, which is kind of interesting. It's like they had this boyfriend who just wasn't doing it for them. And I would like you to come down and talk to me. And I said, well, what's your timetable? And she said, well, it's pretty immediate. Okay. So I looked up online, how I could get there. And I said, well, what are you doing at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon? And she said, I'm available. So I said, great. So what I did, I hung up the phone, started work, got my flight and my rental car, worked all night long on a proposal, and like the frogs were chirping in the pond by the time I was done, got on a plane, drove, went to the appointment or the date, and she came, I come walking in her office and she goes, you look kind of tired. And I explained it to her, and she thought that was kind of cool. And I said, you kind of look like you're kind of tired. What was it? She said, oh yeah, I was up, a surprise party for my. So the cool thing about it is that we actually didn't even talk business. We talked about I'm an economics and Spanish major, and she was an economics and Spanish major. And, I know something about gemstones. I mean, we had this discussion for like about an hour and a half. And then I went, oh crap, I have to drive back to Chicago or St. Louis to get my flight. Well, here's this proposal. And she said, you know what? Don't worry about your proposal. We're fine. We're going to do business. And like, I'm like sleep deprived and I don't know what's going on. And I thanked her. And that was it. It was just the craziest blind date referral thing I'd ever gone to. But my client I found out, had so totally prepped this gal for the meeting that, I wasn't just going to show up and fog the mirror. I mean, I was very, very well prepared, but she just wanted to make sure that she wanted to have a long-term relationship with me and my company, which I thought was just like really cool. And one of the things, as we know, I think there are a lot of statistics, why do customers leave? Customers leave, I believe, because they feel they're taken for granted. And it's really important in just whatever kind of relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a personal relationship, is just to not take it for granted. And it's like a good example from my standpoint. There's this gal, her name is Marlene, and she bought 6 shirts from us in 1993. She was one of our first customers. And to this day, when she orders her 6 shirts, I drive them over to her office. And she says, well, you're so busy, you don't have to. And Marlene, you are one of our first customers, and I have nothing better to do than to personally deliver your shirts. And I think all of us have customers like that. And all of us have customers where we should probably do that. So bottom line, and the cool thing is celebrate anniversaries. People really kind of like that because hey, man, we've been doing business for 5 years or whatever it is. And that's kind of a nice way to, not take things for granted. I fortunately have never been divorced, but I've lost accounts, and I actually have a little bit of an idea of what that must feel like, where you have this relationship and for whatever reason, it doesn't work, or they found somebody who they would, that's more attractive or more interesting. And that happens to us mostly with contracts, like bid type things. And one of the things that I've learned is when you have a long-term relationship that ends, and it's usually it's a reason that doesn't have to do with you, if it's a dollars thing, whatever. And we had a really good example. We had a large contract with the state of Minnesota, and everything was working great. And then it went out for bid again, and we decided not to chew our legs off. So we came in with the exact same prices, and of course we didn't get it because the prices were public information. But when we found out about it, I called up the gal, and she was kind of upset because sometimes procurement gets involved, and she was apologizing. And I said, first of all, thank you for working with us. Second of all, I totally get it. Absolutely no problem. This thing's going to come around in 5 more years. And just don't worry about it. We'll get back together, on occasion. Well, of course, I was really upset. But anyway, so what I started doing is we had been working with these guys for 5 years, And one of the things that they were doing is they were sending us invoices so we could check to make sure that the pricing that they had bid was actually happening. And lo and behold, they weren't. They were. So we ended up getting 100 invoices. And then we made this nice presentation to the procurement department, and they ended up kicking them out. And that's when you abuse somebody's trust. Oh my gosh, they cannot get rid of you fast enough. So it was really weird. So we were still friends. And quite frankly, there were people in the organization who were so upset with the change that they continued to order stuff from us on their corporate credit cards. So although we weren't the contract holder, we had established ourselves as being, pretty cool people to work with. So they continued to buy from us. And then they were doing the thing where, they'd have like a pretty decent sized purchase. So what they do is they buy it from us at like $2,499, a pop. So, I mean, sometimes that happens. Sometimes you're just SOL and, you're not going to get anything. But, you have this relationship and it's, you can get information that might make your life less miserable. This is something that I'm really glad I didn't have to learn by my own mistake. When I go to different trade shows, people like to talk about hey, I'm doing business with XYZ company, and I got this really large transaction and all this kind of stuff. And some of those relationships can actually be quite predatory, especially for a small business like ours. And so what I call those large, low margin clients is fatal attractions, because they can be pretty seductive. And when you go through and look at this list, not only do you have, this long courtship and they're high maintenance and it's just terrible. But the thing that you learn is that smaller deals are actually just fine. Like, quite frankly, I'd rather sell $2,000 worth of mugs to a small company on an A than $10,000 worth of mugs to somebody and make the same amount of money. So although it's really attractive, I mean, and if you have like a monster company behind you that can buy a certain way and you have all the stuff, it's like, if you got daddy behind you that can help you, survive the fatal attraction, by all means do it. I mean, if it fits in your business model, it doesn't fit in our business model because we found that there's too many smaller companies that are loyal and they're fun to work with. So like the fatal attraction part of it, I thought that was kind of an interesting deal. And this is some stuff that I've learned in my guesses. You guys know it too, but you can, like there's certain people, like you become like friends instantly. And some of those turn into really long-term relationships. But that's one of the things that I find is that I consider myself to be a, fairly likable guy, and I can get along with just about anybody. And I think that's usually what will kind of get you the first date or will get you the first deal. But you have to continue to perform, and you have to, show up when you say you're going to be, and get the kids to the ball game on time and that sort of thing. And the thing with trust is that, as you guys know, it takes in a relationship, that is absolutely the most important thing. And it's built up over, years, decades. And if you do something stupid, it can go away or at least be damaged, really, really quickly. And, some other stuff that I learned, I don't quite know why this is, but most of my clients are women. And I don't know why, but one of the things that I've learned, and this is, of course, a generality, to me, it's really fun. Like I'll take a gal out golfing. It is a completely different conversation. And I think it's actually more fun because they want to know, how did you meet your wife? I had one, I was golfing with a gal 2 Mondays ago, and I introduced myself and we're on the golf cart, and she turns to me and she says, okay, tell me when you realized that Katie was the one for you. And that was the first question she asked me. And we haven't done business or anything, but I thought that was it's a lot more fun. But like when I'm talking to guys, hey, what do you do for a living? How many handguns do you own? Do you have a riding lawnmower? Just stuff like that. But that's just the way it is. And it's not that way 100% of the time, but I just find I get asked a lot of different questions. And then just kind of on the flip side, we talked a little bit about that. I think women selling to men, maybe if you're selling to, I think millennials, X's, maybe younger Y's, it's probably okay. But when you start getting into, like, I'm 61, so I'm like one of the boomers, and a lot of us guys still don't get women in the workforce. And I hate to say that, but some of us don't get it. So guys my age and older, sometimes can be a challenge. But then I think women are a lot more skillful, generally speaking, when it comes to relationships. So you can certainly navigate your way around anything you might run into there. My wife and I talk about this a lot, that opposites attract, and it actually doesn't. When you're going through the process of getting to know somebody for whatever reason, if you share the same values, it's a lot easier to have that relationship. And then another thing that we've learned too is that it's the things that attract you to somebody else, the things that happen right away. That's not the stuff that's going to keep you together. And that's true for both business and personal type things. And that's what we found, is that it's our values that really have kept us together for 35 years this year. And we have clients who have been with us since 1993, and that's really what it is. So that's just, like another thing I thought was kind of interesting. There's, I've had in my career, I can think of 2 gals that I called on, and they were both in positions of authority in some very large companies, and it became extremely uncomfortable. And I just kind of like let it go and didn't call back or anything, and kept getting, phone calls. And I just said, you know what, we can't do business, and not going to go into any details, but I'd suggest you go and talk to somebody else. I hope none of you guys ever run into that situation. It's just not very pleasant. So anyway, one of the things that I found, I've had a couple of situations where, quite frankly, we screwed up. And I can think of one failure we had that was really, really severe. That's been probably 15 or more years. But one of the things that you find out is that nobody apologizes anymore. You think about public figures, they'll do the stupidest things, and there'll be photographs and all this kind of stuff, and nobody ever apologizes. It's like, I had too many popsicles that day. They always blame it on something else. And one of the things that I found is that I'm the chief apologist for our company. And fortunately, I've only had to do it a couple of times. But this is what I found out, is that, first of all, you say, hey, I'm sorry. It was my fault. And this is what happened. This is why it won't happen again. This is what we've learned from the situation. And will you forgive me? And, admitting all this stuff and asking for forgiveness, if you have a decent relationship with somebody as a person or in business, you'll probably get that one pass. And then that's happened to us, and that's exactly how we approached it. And I always find people they're so flabbergasted that you go through this process, and it's true, and I've had situations too where, you know, a lot of people, you know, will want a discount or something. And I find that I have been harder on myself. So what I started doing is say, you know, and what can we do to make this right? And I've had people just say, you know what, I understand you made a mistake. You know what, let's just kind of forget about this. Or, you know what, I got to buy some other stuff from you. Why don't you give me like another 20 of them and we'll just call it even. So I find when I leave it up to the customer to like, what's going to make this right, they're a lot easier on us than we would be on ourselves. So anyway, that is the presentation. I pretty much took up almost all the time. But if you have some questions or comments, also too, if you have some other information, Paul can get you my contact info. But thank you. Hey, Paul, thanks for giving me the opportunity to do this for you.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. I love this presentation. I love the analogies because they are so very much right on, and you really hit some great points. I love the idea of Oprah versus Letterman and approaching the different genders. I had never thought of it that way, but that's a great way of thinking about it. When I had my company, I had a salesperson that sold almost exclusively to women. She had very, very few male clients. And when I started looking at how she sold, she presented like 12 options on every opportunity. And I told her, I said, with men, you are just scaring them away because women like to shop, men like to buy. And I said, narrow down your options to a good, better, best when you're dealing with men and continue doing your here's the mall approach to women. And it helped. But you're very much right on that. But you also touched on trust, which is so critically important today as is going to be a differentiator and a real change maker. So I don't see any questions.
Yeah, it's not a big question generator. Although I do see a comment from a friend of mine that I won't read. But that's okay.
Yeah, that's
It's a fellow that I served on the board, PPA I board with, so that you know who you are.
I'm going to go right to my closing comments and hope that the recording comes through. This presentation has been recorded. I will be posting it up on the MIPA Facebook page and be sending it to all of your regional executive directors right afterwards, and it will be posted on the MIPA website as well. Just a reminder, there is a survey form that you can fill out to get CAS credits for today's webinar, and also to mark your calendar for July 27 for Ask the Designer with T. Hamilton to answer all of your art questions. Joe, it's always a pleasure working with you. Got a comment that the PowerPoint's not downloading. You should get that, Ben, when you fill out the survey. You'll automatically get an email from anymeeting.com with a copy of the PowerPoint. If anyone does not, again, my email is real simple, paul@mipa.org. I can send you Joe's contact information as well as a copy of the presentation. Joe, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure working with you, and really appreciate your content today.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and you'll always be Chairman Paul to me.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next month on another Wild Wednesday webinar.
Take care.